There's a whole lot to get to that I think will matter to you. But you know, ladies and gentlemen, there are times when you have to confront evil. There are times in your life when you got to do something that other people won't do. You got one life to live. How are you going to live it? As a bystander? As a coward? Somebody who acquiesces to bigotry and racism and anti-Semitism? You know, it's a funny thing. I would say now, boy, am I getting up there. For 55 years, I've been involved in the conservative movement. And I expanded the conservative movement to what I call the constitutionalist movement. 55 years. It's an interesting thing. I was active in not just the Republican Party, but in promoting conservatism since the age of 13. Now, this isn't a Mark, this is your life moment. I'm explaining something for a reason. I got involved in campaigns for conservatives at a young age, often in Republican primaries, challenging the establishment Republicans, what we called rhinos, a phrase that was not that well known or popular when some of us began using it half a century ago. When I was in law school, and I got to law school early, at the age of 19, I decided to run for my local school board. Why? Because the Republicans controlled the township at the time, not anymore. Cheltenham Township outside of Philadelphia, it's all Democrat now. But the school board was filled with these rhinos and some Democrats. And they were massively raising property taxes on the people there, many of whom were blue collar. On the west end of the township, and the east end of the township, you had mostly Irish, German, and Italian. In the center part of the township, you had mostly Jewish. I ran for the school board in the Republican primary, but I created an organization. Back then, I guess, you didn't even have to register these organizations. A political action committee called Citizens for Tax Limitation. It was a tax revolt before there was a tax revolt. It was a tax revolt before there was a tax revolt on Prop 13 in California. My entire family was involved. I was able to raise $5,000 to put out a mailer, one. I went door to door in a township. I guess back then it was about 35,000 people. I hit 5,000 doors, Mr. Producer. With my mother, my father, my brothers, and me. My buddy Eric, a couple of others. I printed up a business card, put my number on it. I probably had 40 or 50 what we called back then coffee clutches, community meetings. Did something nobody was doing, organized at the local level, formed an independent entity. It was unheard of back then. I was 19. I won the Republican primary in a landslide. I went on to win the general election while I was trying to do my legal studies at the age of 19, and then I turned 20. At the time, anyway, I was the youngest elected public official in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I served on that school board for 3.5 years. It was a 6-year term, but I eventually graduated law school and went out of state to practice law for a period of time. But while I was on that school board, The votes were always, there were 9 of us, 8-1 or 7-2. My buddy Bob Sillick, he was 27. At that point, I was 20. We had a tax revolt, a well-deserved tax revolt, where the citizens rose up. In fact, the tax revolt was so significant it was catching on throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Back then, a newspaper called the Philadelphia Bulletin covered it. Called me the whiz kid. It was pretty well known back then. Philadelphia Inquirer, always left wing, covered it. We had quite a battle on that school board, but the people rose up. And on one occasion, in this relatively small township, we had to have a school board meeting in the high school auditorium. 1,500 people showed up, and they're so furious that they rushed the table and turned it over. This was beginning of the Tea Party before there was a Tea Party. (1976), actually it was 1974, my older brother Doug and I, and unfortunately he's quite ill, we went to Philadelphia to a dinner. They introduced Republicans in that area to a governor who we heard about, we didn't know much about, named Ronald Reagan from California. He was introduced by a senator who we knew less about, named Paul Laxalt from Nevada. They were best friends, neighboring governors. I watched Reagan. I said, that's my man, my brother and I. The problem was, in Pennsylvania, it's a fairly moderate Republican state and a Democrat state, very competitive as it is today. They were not Reagan fans. They were Gerald Ford fans. And after Gerald Ford in 1980, they were George H.W. Bush fans. Well, I was a Reaganite. And we formed a group of young Turks to run for delegate to the 1976 convention. To vote for Reagan. I believe, by memory, there were 82 delegate slots. Unfortunately, my position on the ballot was way down the list. And in order to help some of the other delegates, that is, delegate candidates, I stepped out and supported them. And we won several. And at that convention in 1976, I believe it was in Kansas City, Ronald Reagan almost defeated Gerald Ford. It was about 100 votes apart. And after Reagan spoke, everybody in the convention knew that they had picked the wrong candidate in Gerald Ford, who went down to defeat. 1980 was another battle in Pennsylvania. Same Republican establishment backed George H.W. Bush. Reagan decided not to campaign in Pennsylvania, to focus his resources elsewhere. And so we did a write-in pretty much for him. And he did a significant number. He did very well. But as you know, he went on to win the nomination. I left everything behind, my budding law practice, and joined the Reagan administration. Actually joined it before the president was sworn in December 1980. My father and I, we drove up from Dallas. He came down to Dallas to pick me up and bring me to Washington. I started to work in the Reagan administration early on. Who knew I would become the number 2 lawyer at Interior, deputy solicitor? Who knew I would become associate director of presidential personnel overseeing federal judges and so forth? Who knew that I would become Chief of Staff to the Attorney General of the United States. Always a great honor. To serve great men. And to serve a great purpose. I never expected to be in this business, radio. That's for sure. Fast forward, as I left the Reagan administration, I eventually joined an organization called Landmark Legal Foundation. What a great group, and they still are. And we litigated for school choice. We won the first major case in the state of Wisconsin in the Supreme Court there. We won 2 Supreme Court decisions, federal Supreme Court. Thanks to Landmark and a couple other the conservative legal foundations, we now have school choice. We didn't before. We had to clear the constitutional weeds out of the way. We went after the National Education Association and beat them for using dues-payer money for political campaigns without reporting. We went after the Environmental Protection Agency. We beat them, too. They were held in contempt. We went after Bill Clinton down in Arkansas with Judge Susan Wright. And it was our filing that had him held in contempt. And I can go on and on and on. What a great honor. I eventually became president at Landmark. 1987, being a talk radio aficionado, I started to listen to a guy by the name of Rush Limbaugh. And I would hear him, I said, this guy's good. Before him, I used to listen to a man named, you know who, Mr. Producer in New York? Bob Grant. Philadelphia, I listened to conservative hosts there as well. I would send stuff to Rush through a fax machine on the Constitution and the law. I stopped. Figured he didn't care. He used all of it. And out of the blue, he called me on the phone. He said, keep it coming, Mark. Keep it coming. It's very important. I kept it coming. Then he said, what's with the fax machine? It's time to use emails. Well, we didn't use emails a lot back then. So I did. Catherine was his right-hand lady, absolutely fabulous. And one day he called me F. Lee Levin, the director of his legal division. I was shocked and honored. We became best friends. He introduced me in his own way to Sean Hannity. We became and are best friends. Now, I've been involved in the Reagan Revolution. I've been involved in the Tea Party movement with my book, Liberty and Tyranny. Went to multiple massive rallies. That's where I first met Donald Trump. My book, Liberty and Tyranny. The Convention of States movement. I'm one of the founding fathers of that. With Mark Meckler. With my book, The Liberty Amendments. And on and on. And here I am on radio, having been a guest, then offered a platform. You know, prior to radio, I never earned a lot of money. I earned very little money. At a foundation, working politics, working for the movement, doing these sorts of things, I never earned that much money. Now I do very well. Even early on in radio, I didn't earn very much money. Now, where am I going with all this? I'm going to tell you in a moment because it's very, very important. It's not about me. I know it sounds it. That's not my point. I want to talk about a lesson and what is important in life and what is important in our movement and our mission. I'll be right back. Folks, I have a question for you. Do you believe America's best days are still ahead? With the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up in less than a year, my friends at the Heritage Foundation are taking stock of the current situation, and they need your input. They've launched a survey on America's future to gauge how Americans feel right now about where we are as a nation and where we're headed in the next 250 years. You know, for decades, your American values have been under attack, but now, with President Trump's administration in office, we have an opportunity opportunity to turn the tide and usher in a new golden age for America. But the Heritage Foundation needs to hear from you. What policies do patriots like you most care about? What do you believe are the defining principles of America? What legacy do you believe we should pass on to the next generation? Please visit heritage.org/Levin today and share your feedback and help shape the future of America. That's heritage.org/LEVIN. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation. I'm getting to a point. You'll understand. Just stick with me and be patient. In 2014, a wonderful man came to me, a fairly wealthy man named Kerry Katz, quiet man. He said, I'd like to start a digital TV network or a platform independent of everything else. And in 2014, he and I, the two of us, founded Conservative Review and Conservative Review TV 11 years ago. In 2018, Blaze came to us. They were looking for more liquidity. And Blaze didn't purchase us. We purchased Blaze. And then you have Blaze Media today. So we did that as well. I want to talk about the next step and why I'm bringing all this to you. So there's some context. And much of the time, when the conservative movement was getting stronger, particularly the constitutional part of the conservative movement, there was no Fox News. Or Fox News was relatively new. I think my contribution to talk radio, in addition to being supportive of Rush and Sean, and Bob Grant for that matter, is several-fold. Number one, I've decided to use this format to delve deeply into American history and the Constitution. This format has never been used for that before I came to talk radio about a quarter century ago. And worked closely with Rush and Sean on both of those. Number two, when I got into syndicated radio, my first radio station was WABC in New York. But when I got into syndicated radio, the ABC Radio News Network wanted to syndicate me at the time. Even conservative hosts never got involved in Republican primaries. They had different theories for that. I gave him my background. There wasn't a Republican primary that I ever ignored, because that's where the rubber hits the road. I began getting involved in Republican primaries. I began getting involved in taking on the Republican establishment, particularly in Washington, D.C. There were a few pieces written, including at National Review. What does he mean by establishment, this Levin? I knew what I meant by establishment. Since the age of 13, I've been fighting this establishment. I'm trying to advance constitutional, conservative government and culture. We've come a long way since then, haven't we? So many of you embrace it and support it, and I'm thankful for that. And the whole constitutional conservative movement, which has always been at the center of what I've done, is including as Chief of Staff to Attorney General Meese, who really pushed the whole notion of originalism, has been key to what we do here, among other things. So we changed conservative talk radio in that sense. Less slapstick, less happy-go-lucky, although that's fun too, don't get me wrong. Much more serious, these substantive issues, and I'm not putting down anybody. Everybody's contributed to this who's in this, well, almost, in this format. The left could not compete with us. In the early 2000s, it really took off more in like 2005, 2006, that area. Podcasting came to be without getting into the whole technological history of that. And that meant basically anybody could get on, quote-unquote, on air. Anybody. From any room in their house. Before there were even video feeds and so forth. So you got this podcasting. Podcasting relies on what, Mr. Producer? The internet. It relies on the internet. It relies on handheld devices. This program is podcast. This program is podcast. Not new podcast information. The program I do is podcast because people like to have their devices and listen on their own. That's fine. My attitude is let's push it out on all platforms humanly possible. Now we get to the nub of the matter. You have people who are podcasting, who have big companies behind them, big foreign money behind them, big domestic money behind them, some of it dark money, who are not so much broadcasting, they're podcasting, a word that was developed in the early 2000s. iPods, iTunes, they came up with podcasting. Not all, but most of these people haven't contributed a thing to this country. Nothing. You look at Tucker Carlson. What has he done for the country? He's written for magazines. He's been on TV. He's been on radio. Now he's a podcaster. That's big money. I told you before, I didn't really come into money until I did broadcasting. Candace Owens. Podcasting. What has she done for the country? Absolutely nothing. Zero. Nick Fuentes, 27, 28-year-old punk, a racist, a neo-Nazi. What has he done for the country? Absolutely nothing. Zero. Then we have their surrogates who are with them. And after the first of the year, I'm going to start mentioning them too, who've made an enormous amount of money off these platforms. Some of them are disgruntled former employees at Fox, disgruntled former employees at one of the network TV, whatever they are. Some of them were doing morning radio. What have they done for the country? What movements have they been involved in a significant way? I don't mean ride the coattails and grift off them. Nothing. Nothing. That's okay. But when you have a microphone, whether it's a podcaster, whether it's radio, whether it's satellite, whether it's television, you have a responsibility to contribute something to the country, at least integrity and honesty, and not just grift. You also have a responsibility to your fellow countrymen. So if you see some poison that is spreading, some cancer that is metastasizing, that's going to damage our country, damage our culture, damage our society, politically, damage our party, and destroy everything that's been built. You have an obligation not to acquiesce to it as a coward, certainly not to join in with it, make excuses for it, but to confront it. Whether it's on the left or the right. You have an obligation, a moral obligation, to do just that. No, it's not a waste of time, your time or my time, when I do it. It's crucial to who we are as a society. It's very crucial. You've got guys like Bannon. The guy pled guilty to a felony, ripping off little old ladies, raising money for a wall that was never built. He's telling us Trump's going to run for a third term. Well, there is the thing called the Constitution. Nobody gets to run for a third term. Nobody. And he won't. Bannon's playing you. Jews are under attack by these people because anybody can get behind a microphone. And it just turns out the Jew haters are very much attracted to the microphone like flies to you-know-what. But now Christians are under attack by these people. You, Mr. and Mrs. America, Jew or Christian, the Judeo-Christian value system that created this marvelous wonder called the United States of America. You're now under attack by some of these people who you've been following, who you've been paying money to, who you defend, whose comments you repeat. Why am I the only one talking out about it? I don't mean posting something on the internet. I know you are my audience. You want the truth. You work hard. Those of you who retire have worked hard. We know about the Marxist Islamists, the communists. We see it. We know about it. I talk about it every day. But there's another cancer growing within. And it's our responsibility because they're waving around our flag. They claim to speak for you. Neo-Nazis. Anti-American. Anti-military. Or one or more of the above. It is shameful that people with big audiences say nothing. But I know why they don't. Because when you do speak out, you come under vicious attack. Not just by them, but by the liberal media who promotes the Tuckers and the Fuenteses and the Bannons and the Owens day in and day out. They promote the anti-Semites and the bigots and the isolationists and the hate America crowd. They want them to define you and me and our party and our movement. They paint a picture of America that is dark. They paint a picture of America that is racist and bigoted and anti-Semite. They paint a picture of America that rejects the majority faith in this country, Christianity now. I'll get to it, trust me. They lie, they twist, they spew, and they know that at least for now, the more they do that, the more they attract and the more money they make and the more attention they get. And that's what they have to have if they're podcasters or if they're subscription-based services or whatever they are. They need it. They don't need 90% of the country. They need 2% of the country. That's good enough. Good enough. 5%. Good enough. So they get more extreme and radical and crazy by the day. And that media I spoke about promotes them more and more by the day. That media, the left media, knows they're liars, knows who they are, hates their guts, but uses them to try and dumb down the country and try and convince the country that this is you and me. When it's not you and me.